Hello, and welcome back to our Fireside Chat for October. I'm Doug Montgomery, your instructor in your Design of Experiments MOOC. For those of you that are relatively new to either the MOOC or this event, this is an event, a fireside chat. I'm kind of channeling Franklin Roosevelt here. With a guest speaker, and we explore topics of interest, I hope, to you on experimental design and some applications. And we always leave some time at the end for questions and answers. A great time to ask questions, and they can either be about the Coursera course, they can be questions about the topic that our guest is talking about, or there may be some specific situation that you're involved in and you'd like to talk to us about that. So we can certainly accommodate all of those kinds of questions. For those of you that are on Coursera, these Fireside Chat recordings are in the course. You can find them in the resources tab of your course. Quick reminder, please keep your mics muted and your cameras off during the session so that we don't have any background noise that might be a disturbance. And if you want to send in a question, the best way to do that is to use the chat function on your Zoom menu bar. And you don't need to wait until the Q&A begins to do this. You can start putting in questions anytime that you want to. And if we don't get the questions answered during this time, we will respond to the questions in Coursera for people that are enrolled in the course. So that's the background. I would like to introduce our guest today. Ming-Hung Kao's research interest is in the design and analysis of experiments. That's why I invited him to be a guest. He particularly enjoys optimal design issues that arise from a lot of what I think of as very modern applications with complex data structures. He works on developing efficient computational methods and insightful theoretical results to identify optimal designs for different kinds of applications, such as experiments involving sparse functional or longitudinal data, dose response clinical trials with mixed continuous and categorical data, human function brain imaging experiences with functional MRI or FNIRS. He's trying to provide really useful pragmatic tools and guidance for experimenters to select efficient designs for collecting the most informative data at minimal cost. Part of his research is supported by a career grant from the National Science Foundation. He has industrial experience in data collection, processing, and analysis for various clinical trials, and does statistical consulting work on things like, for example, analyzing gene sequence libraries, as well as education, medical, and social science data. And he is an associate professor here at Arizona State University in our School of Mathematical and Statistical Sciences. And I'm really pleased to have him as a guest because I think he does really interesting, fascinating work.
Thanks for having me here. I'm really honored to be here. So I want to discuss optimal designs for sparse functional data analysis today. All right, so first I will give a relative background on optimal design of experiments. Now, for simplicity, I will start with this very simple linear model where yi is the continuous response, xij's their predictors or features, beta j unknown parameter, epsilon ij, iid random noise, and I use n to denote the sample size here. So in matrix term, we can write down this model in the middle of the screen. It's just like we have a response vector y equals a design matrix x times beta vector plus epsilon. Now for simplicity, we will assume that x is just has a full column rank, and from Gauss-Markov theorem, we know that the blue, the best linear unbiased estimator for our parameter beta is just x transpose x inverse x transpose y. And from the same theorem, we also know that the blue is the most precise among all the linear unbiased estimators. For example, if we would like to estimate a parametric function, C transpose beta, where C is a constant vector, then we can define the estimation precision as the reciprocal of the variance of the blue C transpose beta hat. And immediately we observe that, oh, this estimation precision is a function of x. So if we will be able to like select a good design matrix X, then we can further improve the estimation precision. So this is an experimental design problem. Now, a design here is a multi-set of x1 through xn, and each xi is just the ith row of the design matrix. And some of these rows will be the same, so we can and we often represent a design as a probability measure, xi here. So in xi, we have T1 through Tm. These are called simple points as well we have in the probability. And they are actually just the distinct rows xi's in the design or in the design matrix X. And wi's for this probability measure is the weights. They actually represent the proportion of Ti of each simple point in the design. And wi's are positive and they sum to 1. So in reality, we will want the sample size n times the wi to be integers because they represent the number of times each ti appear in our design matrix. And when this holds, then we have an exact design. But for optimization problem, we normally relax this constraint to allow wi to be any real number in between 0 and 1. And this gives approximate design problems. So for an approximate design problem, what we would like is to find a design measure xi that maximizes the information matrix denoted by the M here. And M is just like X transpose X in our setting, in our linear regression setting. And this is inversely proportional to the covariance of the blue beta hat. And it can also be written as the weighted sum of TJ transpose. Now recall that TJ is the support point which corresponds to one row in the design matrix. But M is a matrix, so to optimize it, we normally optimize a scalar function instead. So we have something like A optimality criterion, D optimality criterion, and I optimality criterion. There are also other criteria. But for example, A criteria, for A criteria, we would like to minimize the trace of M inverse. This will minimize the average variance of beta J hat. But for these criteria, we normally can omit the sample size because that can be factored out. The sample size n can be factored out from these criteria. So this means that our optimal approximate designs will not depend on the sample size, which will be different for the study that I will discuss today. But most commonly used optimal design criteria fees, they are differentiable and positive, definite, non-singular information metrics. And more importantly, they can be formulated as a convex function of the information matrix. With that, we can develop what we call the equivalence theorems. Now, these theorems are useful for verifying optimal solution if we obtain one. And also it is useful for evaluating the efficiency of other design if we don't get an optimal solution. And many people use these theorems to guide the search of optimal solution. Now, these equivalence theorems, they actually are derived from the directional derivative as I presented in the bottom of the screen here. So this is the directional derivative of a criteria phi at one information matrix M1 in the direction of another information matrix M2. So this is just an idea of what an equivalence theorem might look like. I will omit the detail, but only mention that this is like based on the fact that if we are already at the bottom of the valley, we cannot go further down regardless which direction that we had to. So this gives us this equivalence theorem, but there also are some byproducts that we can use. I think the most important one is probably the last one, because it provides a lower bound for the relative efficiency of a design to the optimal solution. And to calculate this lower bound for relative efficiency, we don't really need to know the optimal design. So it's very easy to use. Now, with that, I will move on to the design for sparse functional data analysis. So here's the setting. We have x1t through xnt They are IID square inequal random functions. They are defined on a compact, for example, time domain T. And each xi has a continuous mean function mx and also a continuous covariance function c sub x here. And from each curve, we can observe noisy observations, uik. So uik is just xi plus epsilon ij. Epsilon ik is just like the noise here. What's the design issue here? Now, in many practical situations, K, the cap K, which is the number of observations that we can obtain from each curve, is relatively small. For example, in the medical setting, like we don't get the patient to come back every day. We probably will ask them to come back like 4 or 3 times only. So in that case, we would like to select the best time points for the subject to for the patient to come back. So this is the design goal. We want to select the best set of K time points so that we can have the most precise prediction of the underlying random function. For example, this is to study the progress. Excuse me, to study the progress of a disease, say. And this is probably a slightly more general setting. It's just like we have cap n distinct conditions, T1 through T cap n. These are the columns in the picture here. And what we have is just like we will be able to assign K, cap K out of the n conditions to each subject and make observations, right? So these are the subjects are just the rows here. And for example, like the cross are the conditions that we assign to each subject and make observation. So our design goal here is to find an optimal set of conditions and so that we can make the most precise inference. So coming back to the FDA, one of the very common approach for studying the underlying random function xi is the functional principal component analysis, FPCA. And this is done with this Kahuna-Loeb representation by rewriting xi or representing xi as its mean function, mx, plus this infinite sum. Now, inside this infinite sum, we see a psi function. This is the eigenfunction with eigenvalue lambda j for our covariance function Cx. Now, this is from Mercer theorem, and this can be viewed as just like the eigen decomposition for the functional space. So we do have eigenpairs. Those are eigenfunctions psi j and eigenvalue lambda j. Now, inside this infinite sum, we also see zeta ij. These are the FPC scores. This is obtained by just projecting the standard random function xi. So it's xi minus mx is mean. So the standard xi, we project it onto the eigenfunction. And zeta ij is the last line here. Zeta ij, they are independently, identically no, it is just independent normally distributed with mean 0 and variance lambda j. Again, lambda j is the eigenvalue. All right, so for predicting this xi with sparse data, Yao et al. They propose this prediction where x hat is again the mean function plus this finite sum. Now the first thing here is like the FPC score zeta ij is replaced by its best linear unbiased predictor or blob. We have a formula here, but this is just like done by plugging the data and obtain this blob. And psi j again, the eigenfunction. And we notice that here we use a finite sum to approximate an infinite sum. This is like our regular PCA, where we just focus on the J leading FPCs for dimensionality reduction here. And there are also some other unknown terms, including the mean, the psi, the sigma square. They are estimated from smoothing methods by pulling the data across different subjects. So this is the prediction of the random curve. All right, now for this FPCA framework, we already have some previous work on optimal design. These are the 4 works and also including our previous works. Those are the last 2 works. But the design goal here is to identify the the best set of K time points that minimizes the integrated mean square error, IMSC, for predicting the underlying random curve, xi. So we can write down a closed form for this IMSC for xi hat. It includes a matrix lambda, which is the diagonal matrix with diagonal elements lambda 1 through lambda j. And also we have a psi I matrix that actually is just formed by the eigenfunctions psi 1 through psi j, evaluated at our selected time points ti. So this psi I is a k by j matrix. And now to evaluate this IMSE, there also are some unknown parameter, including the eigenpairs. And to obtain the eigenpair, we also need to know the mean. So these unknown parameter will be estimated from the pilot study before we find a design. So in a sense, this type of design is locally optimal design. And then one optimal T star, which is the best set of K time points, K sampling time points for sampling the curve, will be obtained. And this same T star will be used for sampling all the next n curves, x1 through xn. Now, we can do this because the overall IMSE, as I presented in the middle of the screen here, the IMSE for x hat can be written as the sum of the individual IMSE xi hat here. So if we will be able to just find one design T star that minimize the individual IMSE for xi, then the same design can be used to minimize the overall IMSE for the n curves. This is why when we look at these previous works, they all focus on just obtaining the same T star and use the same T star for all n curves. Right, but recently we start with a new design issue on this sparse FDA. Now this is from this work near L, a recent work. They propose something called functional empirical component approach, FECA, and they show that this approach can outperform the previous FPCA in some cases. And one major difference between the two approaches is that FECA does not require a precise knowledge on the mean function mx here. So if we don't have a precise knowledge on the mean of the random function, we might want to use this FECA approach. And without that knowledge, they apply the Mercer theorem on the uncentered second moment function of xi. So this is defined as our kx here. Now the difference between FECA and FPCA is like for FPCA, we focus on the covariance function. That's the centered second moment. But here, we don't worry about that mean function and just focus on the uncentered second moment. So in this case, we have a different set of eigenpairs, and they will be denoted as like tau j and eta j here in my slide. And with this, we can write out the model for FECA. Now, this is very similar to FPCA, but now the xi function is approximated by this finite sum. Now, this cap j here in this finite sum might not be the same as the cap j, the number of leading FPCs in FPCA, but I still use the same notation. But again, this finite sum involves this eta j, which is the eigenfunction. And also it has alpha ij. Now this time alpha ij is called FEC score, is obtained by projecting the uncentered xi to this eta j, the eigenfunction here. All right. So again, our focus is on predicting xi under this framework, and we want to find an optimal design for it. So to proceed, we first rewrite this model in matrix terms. So on the left-hand side, we have a bold UI. So that's a UI vector. That's the observations, UI1 through UIk for the ith curve. And then on the right-hand side, we have Fi, that's the design matrix, and that's formed by the eigenfunctions of the second moment function, Kx. And those are eta 1 through eta cap j evaluated at the time points, the sampling time points that we select for the ice curve. And alpha I, the bold alpha I is just a collection of FEC scores as we defined in the previous slide. But now we decompose that into two portions, the theta vector and the gamma vector. Now the theta vector would be the mean of this FEC score. They are fixed, so we can view that as a fixed effect. And then the remaining portion is just the gamma. That will be random, so that's the random effect. So if we look at this model again, it actually is just a mixed effect models with theta being the fixed effect and gamma being the random effect. And gamma has zero mean, and this covariance matrix is this delta minus theta, theta transpose. So this delta is a diagonal matrix with diagonal elements being tau 1 through tau j. So those are the eigenvalues for our unstandard second moment function here, right? All right, now to formulate this design problem, we again consider the plot, the best linear unbiased predictor for the random function. Here we denote it by xi tilde. So this xi tilde can be written this way. It becomes our design matrix for this ice curve times the blue, the best linear unbiased estimator for the fixed effect theta, and also then another term is just like the gamma tilde, which is the blob for predicting the random effect gamma here. Now, one thing that we need to know is like this blob might not exist. It only exists when the overall F matrix, the overall design matrix has a full column rank. And this overall design matrix F is just obtained by stacking all the individual design matrix FIs together. So this actually tells us that the design selection is very important here because some designs might not allow the existence of the block. In other words, if we select a wrong design, then we will not be able to predict our random curve. But if the block exists, we can write down the covariance function for the block for alpha, and I'll explain why we want to focus on this covariance matrix. But this covariance matrix has a G, which is a G matrix, which is just a constant matrix, not to worry about that. But it also inverse of a huge matrix here. And then that big matrix also incurs this W theta I, as I have presented in light blue or cyan color here. The W theta I involves this unknown theta. So we will want to get rid of this unknown theta later, and I will show you how. But to sum, this actually, the covariance matrix looks quite complex here. But why do we want to worry about this covariance matrix? Because we can show that when we want to predict the N curves and random curves, the IMSE can be written as the trace of the covariance matrix of alpha tilde. And then so by minimizing this trace, we are actually minimizing the IMSE that give us the best prediction here, all right? So it will be useful to derive a simple expression for this covariance. And then so we've done that in our paper, but that it gives us a simple expression for the IMSE, which is like near the end of the screen here, the slide here. And then it actually involves a trace of W theta inverse plus this more complex term is like a W theta raised to the power -2 and also the inverse of A theta matrix. Now looking into this A theta matrix, it actually includes like the information for all the next N curves. So when we find the design, we actually need to think about all the N curves together. But one good thing about this expression is that we now can use A theta directly to check if the design allows us to predict X. This is like when A theta is positive, definite, or non-singular, then we will be able, the design will allow us to predict our random function under this setting here. All right. So as I mentioned, this IMSE involves the unknown parameter theta. So we want to get rid of that. And what we propose here is to replace this W theta I with the WI by setting theta to 0 And it turns out that the final result, which is the phi d here, the criteria that we have, becomes an upper bound for our IMSE that we want to minimize. So minimize this upper bound phi d is equivalent to finding a robust minimax design that protects against the worst case scenario. So we will work on that. But again, we will consider the approximate design. So we will rewrite our design in this probability measure xi here. Now the TI is, they are the distinct sets of K sampling time points. So for each TI, we have K sampling time points on the time domain here. And WI, again, they are the weights, simply indicating the proportion of TI in our design. So we rewrite the criteria phi d in terms of this approximate design that becomes this phi n sub na here in the middle of the screen. But immediately we see that this criteria actually looks more complex than the common criteria that we use in classical design problems. And also we see that the sample size n only appears in the first term of phi na, but it doesn't appear in the second term. So unfortunately, we cannot factor out our sample size. And that means that the design, our optimal approximate design, will depend on the sample size. So with these observations, we see that we will need new results to work with this new criteria. So we derive some new useful results that help us to find optimal design. The first thing is like we show that the our criteria is convex in the probability measure or in the design measure xi, and also with this convexity, we derive the equivalence theorem. Again, I will not go into the details, but this is based on a directional derivative with respect to this xi. So this is like directional derivative as I shown in the middle of the screen here, the directional derivative from one design xi1 to another design xi2 here. And then following this, we can derive a lower bound for relative efficiency for any design to the optimal without having obtaining the optimal design, without knowledge of the optimal design. We still can evaluate this lower bound, which is pretty convenient. But one thing I want to mention, all these results, that's different from the classical one, all these results are derived by assuming that we have a given sample size n, right? So as we have seen that our design, our optimal approximate design will depend on the sample size n. So it will be useful to identify some conditions or to identify designs that will be optimal across different sample sizes. And then we derive the sufficient and necessary conditions for this. That's why I'm showing in the middle of the screen here. If an optimal design for one sample size satisfy this inequality in the middle of the screen, then that design would also be optimal for other sample sizes. But this condition actually looks a little bit complex. So we further simplify that to give us a very simple sufficient condition. And we will use this sufficient condition in our numerical study. And also we provide results for cases when there is one eigenfunction. So this is just a special case that we discuss here. All right. And then we develop based on the theorem that we provide, we develop search algorithm to search optimal designs. In the interest of time, I think I will just skip the search algorithm. If you're interested, we have like papers presenting the search algorithm. But these algorithms can be used. We have algorithm for finding exact design when we assume that the sample size times our weights is like integer. We also have algorithm for finding optimal approximate design. But after finding that optimal approximate design, we also propose a rounding method to round the approximate design so that the n times wi becomes integer again, and then we can use that final design in practical studies or in reality, right? So here, let me talk a little bit about the numerical studies that we have. Now we have conducted several numerical studies. This is one of the simulations that we have. And in this simulation, we assume the eigenfunctions. They are formed by the Fourier basis function on the time domain 0 and 1. and we impose a regular grid of size 21 on this time domain. And also the eigenvalues are assumed to be like 10 to the 10 over the 2 to the power j here. Sigma square is assumed to 1, and also we consider different combination of sample size n, of the number of leading FPC j, and also the number of observations k that we can obtain from each curve. And so in total, we do have like 3 to the power 3 4 factorial setting, right? Now here is just like selected results when j is set to 7 and the sample size is set to 10, and we obtain like designs for cases when K3, case 5, and case 7. Now recall that K is the number of observations that we obtain from each random curve, right? Now, for example, if we focus on the case when K is 3 and look at the, these are the sample points and their weights, and then look at the very first one, which is 2, 5, and 8. Now recall that we actually impose a regular grid of size 21 on our time domain. So this design actually tells us, this sample points actually tells us that to sample at the second time points, fifth time points, and at eighth time points on the time grid. All right, and on the right hand side, we have this 0.068. That's just the weights for this sample points. But if we look closer to this final approximate design, we immediately notice that we have 14 sample points, which is greater than our sample size 10. So we actually use the rounding method that we proposed to run this design, and then eventually we find a design with 10 sample points that's obtained by deleting the 4 sample points that are in gray color that has the smallest weights. And then so we use those 10, the remaining 10 sample points as our final design. And that final design has a relative efficiency of 99.91% to our optimal design that we obtain for k equal to 3. So in this case, this final design is still very efficient. Now, if we move on to the case when k equals to 5, we see a sample points here, and we can use the rounding method to round it to n equals to 10. There is no problem for doing this. But also, if we increase our sample size to like 30 or 50, then we see that the optimal design for those cases, for those larger sample sizes, we only will have like 4 sample points. And those 4 sample points are the sample points that are in blue colors. Now, if we look at the design that containing only those 4 blue sample points, then we will see that it will satisfy the sufficient condition that we provide previously. That means that this same design will continue to be optimal for a larger sample size when n is greater than 30. All right, and the same is true for k equals to 7. We have 2 sample points now, but this design with 2 sample points, it will actually satisfy our sufficient condition. So that means that for any case with a larger sample size, that the sample size is greater than or equal to 10, we can continue to use this design, and that would be optimal. Right. So we also try our method on real data, the CD4 counts for an HIV study. I think I'll omit the details of this study, but only mention our result here. So for this study, what we have done is we considered 2 different approaches. The first one is like the FPCA, which is on the right-hand side, and the first method that I introduced. The second one is the FECA. For those 2 approaches, we separately obtain optimal designs for them. And we assume that we can take 2 observations from each subject, or 3 observations from each subject, or 4 or 5. So we have 4 different cases. And then for FPCA, if we look at the table, that's on the right-hand side, right panel here. So we only have 1 sample point for FPCA design. I explained this at the beginning of the talk that we only need 1, and that would be optimal for the FPCA approach. But on the left-hand side, we have FECA design, and for some cases, we do need more support points. This is because we will want to be able to predict our X. In those cases, we will need more support points to achieve this, right? So these are the design, but then we compare these designs by calculating their relative efficiency to the optimal design. Again, we consider these two different approaches. On the left-hand side of the table, we have the FECA approach. That's we use the FECA to analyze the data without having the precise knowledge of the mean function for our random function. But on the right-hand side, we consider that we do have good knowledge about our mean function, and we use FPCA approach. Now, for the left-hand side, for the FECA, our FECA design would attain 100% relative efficiency, so we don't present them there. On the right-hand side, the FPCA design would have 100% relative efficiency, so we don't present them there. And for each of these cases, we also generate 100 random designs and evaluate their relative efficiency to optimal design. And this is like, for example, for FECA, that's the first column of this table, and for FPCA, that's the third column of this table. And we immediately see that random design might not perform well. In the worst case, it can only like attain like less than 25% relative efficiency of the optimal design. So we want to be very careful if we just want to use random design. And also we observed that for the FECA approach on the left-hand side, now one of the FPCA design, which only has one support point, has no efficiency. This is because it does not allow us to predict the random function. So if we want to, the random function X, so if we want to use FECA approach, we also want to be very careful when selecting the design, because like I said, some designs might not be even allowed us to do this prediction, right? But on the right-hand side, the FECA has some like the relative efficiency is like 80 or 90 something. But I think from this table, what we might conclude is probably like when we use random design, we want to be very, very careful. And if we know which approach that we want to use, for example, if we have precise knowledge about the mean of the random function, we can use the FPCA approach. And in that case, I probably would recommend you just use the FECA design. Otherwise, if we don't have that precise knowledge about our mean function and we would like to use the FECA approach, then we probably just like to obtain the FECA design, and that will be good for the study here. So here's a quick summary. So we consider optimal designs, which are the sampling type points here for collecting sparse functional data. And we see that our design criteria, our design problem has some unique features. So it actually, the classical approaches cannot be directly applied here. So we developed some theory and also like computational methods for tackling this design problem. And we also demonstrate the importance of the design selection, because some design might produce very bad or even produce useless data. All right. So this is what I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Interesting presentation. Where have you found most of the applications for this?
So
the public health data.
Is like medical data
Okay.
is one thing. For example, like the example that we mentioned, if we want to study the progress of a disease, then that can be assumed as underlying random function, but we can only ask the patient to come back to take measurements at a certain time point.
You can't get the patient to come back every day.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
You'll be very annoying.
Well, I've been involved in some studies years ago where that was a problem, because we were actually using interns and residents in a hospital, right, as part of a study. It was kind of an interesting study. We were looking at the effectiveness of different replacement fluids for blood chemistry parameters.
Mhm.
And the motivation for this was they were trying to figure out what can we do to relieve dehydration in surgical patients.
Right, right, right.
One of the causes of complications in surgery, particularly for elderly patients, was dehydration. And what kind of fluids can you give them to drink
Mhm.
that help alleviate that problem? And so they had several different fluids that they were testing. So what we needed was a collection of dehydrated patients,
Right.
to see how quickly their blood chemistry came back.
Mhm.
And so we decided that what we were going to do was to take healthy, active people and dehydrate them.
Okay.
And we dehydrated them by running them on a treadmill
Mhm.
in a very hot, humid room.
Okay.
And then we had them drink an amount of this replacement fluid
Mhm.
equal to weight loss.
Mhm.
And then you did the blood draw
Right.
every like 5 or 10 minutes,
Oh.
and did the analysis of the blood chemistry to see how quickly some of these things like cerium, potassium were coming back.
Right.
So we were using interns and residents
Mm.
from this hospital, and scheduling them for these events was almost impossible.
Right.
Because you'd say, well, you're supposed to come in this morning, but you're involved in some situation at the emergency room, and
Right.
we can't get you.
Right. So that's the practical constraints.
Yeah. Well, and then there were people that dropped out.
Okay.
They hated the idea of being dehydrated.
Okay.
The process of dehydrating these people, and you had, of course, you had to wait a certain amount of time before you could bring them back, because you didn't want to. You didn't want a person to, you didn't want to put a subject through this like 3 days in a row.
Mm.
That would not work.
Right.
So you wanted to make sure there was plenty of recovery. And we probably didn't do the world's best job of figuring out how to manage this, but we did get interesting results, and we did find that one of the replacement fluids in particular worked a lot better than others.
Oh, yes.
And we tested a lot of different things. We tested water. We tested Gatorade.
Right.
We actually tested Coca-Cola.
Oh.
An uncarbonate version.
Right. Right.
We made sure it wasn't carbon. We figured that carbonation was not going to help. And so we had like 4 or 5 of these different fluids.
Right.
And the study went on for quite a long time, but it did end up showing that there was one particular fluid that the team had formulated that worked better than anything else, which was good.
Yeah.
But this methodology would have been very helpful, I think.
But like so if we introduce like the treatment, there becomes an additional factors that should like put into the model, and then we do have models for those, and then
but that was the I thought kind of an interesting problem. One of the things that you I think mentioned that you had worked on was experiments where you have both continuous and categorical responses.
True.
I've done some work on that as well.
Yes.
I have a former PhD student who we looked at optimal designs for multi-response experiments where we had a normally distributed response, and then either a binomial or a Poisson response. And found a general method for handling either 2 responses or 3. the motivation for that study was quite interesting. It's a project that's funded by the Defense Department, and what we're working on were experiments for doing operational testing. And this is something that the DoD is mandated to do. There's actually a Congress passed a law, back in the late 60s, early 70s, that said you can't put any new system in the field until you have tested it in operating conditions to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do. Because the tendency is to rely a lot on end-stage development testing, which is always done under perfect conditions. I used to joke that the tank was being driven around a test track by a bunch of PhD engineers. It works perfectly, but then when you take it out in the field, doesn't necessarily, So,
Right.
but we were looking at a problem, something like this: is you might have an air-to-ground missile system that's mounted on an airplane, and so your experimental design factors might be the altitude of the aircraft, speed, airspeed, and then the heading relative to the target.
Right.
And so then your response variables might be things like time to acquire the target. And you can maybe assume that that's normal, or it can be transformed into something that's approximately normal. And then the other thing you're interested in is when you fired the missile, did it hit the target?
Yeah. Yes or no.
Binomial.
Right.
So and you get to run one very expensive experiment. I mean, each trial in this experiment is many thousands of dollars.
Right.
And then there are time constraints, because you've got to find a place where you can actually run the experiment. So you're using one of the test ranges, out in California. And so you want small experiments, but yet you want to be able to estimate these factor effects with some reasonable precision. So we came up with a method for finding the optimal designs for these problems. We used kind of a simplistic approach. We used a desirability function type approaches, and we found designs that optimized the combined desirability function for the and the designs actually work really well.
So it was implemented.
Yeah. In fact, when we presented this result to people from the Defense Department, they said, "You folks have solved one of the major problems that we face in doing these kinds of operational tests." How do we set up an experiment where we can reliably measure all of these things and not get ridiculous results, and
also save money,
and save a lot of money. And then, of course, if things don't go well in the initial test, you may have to come back and do more testing, and that turns out to be a problem of not only the cost, but the availability of the resources.
Right.
If you're using one of the test ranges out in the desert out here in the West, there's a long line of people that are wanting to use that. And when you say, "Well, gee, I need to come back and do another 10 runs," and the range management people say, "Well, okay, we can take you next July." That's just not
right.
That's not a workable problem. So being able to get designs, to find designs that had that produced reliable results with a reasonable sample size was an important consideration. And we actually provided the test agencies with a jump script to do this.
Mhm.
So you can input the parameters that you need to, and run the jump program. And there you are.
Right.
And we have some follow-on work that we've not completed yet. This is still an ongoing project, but one of the things we've been looking at is how sensitive are the designs that you get
Mm.
to the prior distributions that you have to assume in order to find the optimal designs for the categorical
I see.
response.
Using the Bayesian
Yeah,
approach
yeah,
for both design and analysis,
just for the design.
just for the design.
Yeah, just for
Okay.
design. And we found that the designs that we getting for the types of, and we're looking at simple models, you know, main effects and two-factor interaction type models. We're not looking at anything really too elaborate. But we found that the designs we get are relatively insensitive to the choices of the prior distributions, which is nice to know.
Yeah.
Because they that's the one, it's the one bugaboo when you start talking to this test community about using a Bayesian approach.
Right.
You know, you say, well, you have to have a prior distribution, you know, and their eyes glaze over because
How do you?
they don't know what that is,
Right.
and they don't have any real basis for assessing a prior. If they did, they might not be doing the test in a certain way. And we've also looked, or we're looking into the power of, you know, how does the power change as you change the sample size?
Right.
Yeah, because you're typically generally looking for fairly large effects, but you'd sort of like to know if there are small factor effects, do you have a reasonable chance of detecting them with a certain sample size? Because the sample size is almost always driven by cost.
Right.
You know, we can only afford to do 10 runs.
Yeah.
Or we can only afford to do 15 runs.
Right.
And it might not be cost, but it might be range time, because each run in your test might take several hours. So it's kind of an interesting problem. And I've had a couple of PhD students that have worked on this, and one of them is, she's still finishing up her dissertation. She's doing a lot of the work on prior sensitivity and power. And we published a couple of papers in you may not be familiar with the journal, the Military Operations Research Journal. Okay. That's the place that you want to put this work, because that's the journal those people read. Right. But anyway, I find what you're doing to be absolutely fascinating. Yes. And I just wonder if there's any applications for that in some of the kinds of things that I'm
like
working on. Because we should talk more about this.
Yeah, definitely. Sure.
Do we have any questions from the audience? And nobody sent anything in advance. Unusual. Very unusual.
Everybody must be busy.
They must have been on fall break too.
Yeah, I just finished.
Yeah, we're just at ASU. We're just coming back from fall break. So, well, if we don't have any questions, we're basically done. Is there anything else you'd like to you know, anything else you'd like to talk about what you're working on presently, or?
Probably no. That's
okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is fascinating stuff, and I you know, I can see applications of this for things that I've done in the past that if I had known, I would have done something better. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you coming. I think we can we can wrap up about 3 or 4 minutes early and let you get back to work.
Yes, thank you.